Deep in the dark history of the American South, strange things have a habit of just falling from the sky. And I'm not talking about regular rain or hail or stuff like that. I'm talking about blood, red, clotted, and completely unmistakable. From every corner of our region, there are documented accounts of blood falls that have baffled farmers, investigators, scientists, and preachers alike. When we can't explain it, some call it divine judgment. Others insist on the laws of science. And in one case, the experts even blamed butterflies. In this episode, I'll be tracing the long, strange history of one of my favorite unexplained phenomena. From ancient myths and medieval omens to the very real and very unsettling events that unfold right here in our own backyard. Welcome to Haunts and Hollows, True Tales of the Gothic South. I'm your host, mystery author Liam Ash. This episode is sponsored by my friends at Arcanoctus. They encourage you to unlock your curiosity with their collection of the odd, the unusual, and the obscure. I want to start this episode off with a story from the small town of Farmington, Iowa, back in 1892. That year, the spring weather had been particularly rough, with nearly nonstop rain, wind, and storms for several days. While that wasn't too far from the ordinary, one shower in particular was about as far from the ordinary as the townspeople could imagine. One April afternoon, their main street and the surrounding areas were doused in a wet layer of clotted blood and raw meat. It fell on the streets in buckets, and it covered the houses. Residents were more than just a little alarmed, which, of course, I would be too. All of their livestock was accounted for, so no one could guess where the carnage had come from. For several weeks, they whispered about the blood rain that had fallen on Farmington and what it might mean for their little town, and that's because that's usually not a good sign. An answer finally came 3 weeks later in a letter from nearby Kansas. According to a story in the Ohio Democrat, a small community in the neighboring state had been hit hard by a cyclone that same fateful day. While the townspeople were for the most part fine, one building took the brunt of the twister's fury, the slaughterhouse and sausage factory. It turns out that the tornado had lifted that entire building into the air, including all the freshly killed pigs and a healthy supply of meat and blood that was used for making blood sausage, and carried it off in the direction of faraway Farmington to the northeast. The only remnant of the slaughterhouse that was ever found was the Iowa blood fall more than 100 miles away. Now, this all sounds pretty fantastic, but it's not as rare as you might think. Stories about things other than water falling from the skies actually are a staple in world religions and folklore traditions from all around the globe. I mean, just think of the phrase raining cats and dogs. And before I get back to blood falls, let me jump on that tangent for just a minute. Have you ever wondered where that phrase comes from? Because no, it usually doesn't rain actual cats and actual dogs. Well, this one is a little bit of a mystery. While other authors had used phrases like, it's raining pitchforks, or it's raining stair rods, the first known use of anything like raining cats and dogs was a 1651 poem by British author Henry Vaughan. He turned the phrase, dogs and cats rained in shower. And a year later, English playwright Richard Brome penned the phrase, it shall rain dogs and polecats. It was most likely popularized, however, by Jonathan Swift. In a 1738 satire, one character worries that it will rain cats and dogs. Now, given Swift's influence as a writer, this is likely where the phrase entered popular use. Okay, so now that's settled. What the heck does it actually mean? Still a little more of a mystery. Now, several theories have been put forth over the years, including a corruption of the Greek word for waterfall, or stories of the storm god Odin and his trusty dog companions. The one that's gained the most traction, however, is a little more down to earth. Now, if you go back to 17th century England, street sanitation was just not great. Heavy rains did the lion's share of the work, and that included washing away of dog and cat corpses that would often collect in the gutters. So, during a heavy rain, you just might see a steady flow of dead cats and dead dogs draining into the rivers. Okay, time to get back on topic. What else, other than dead cats and dead dogs, has been thought to fall from the skies? As it turns out, plenty. Frogs, fish, and birds seem to be the most popular in world folklore. The Bible mentions the shower of frogs as one of the great plagues in Exodus. Later in that same book, God sends a shower of quails and manna to feed the fleeing Israelites. In Greek myth, 4th century writers talk of a rain of fish that lasted for 3 days. And Roman historian Pliny the Elder recorded accounts of frogs and fish falling from the skies in his 1st century work, Natural History. So how about more modern examples? Well, in the 2000s, torrential rains of frogs were widely reported in both Serbia and Hungary. And in 2010, hundreds or more spangled perch fell on the Australian desert town of Lajamanu, which, I should like to note, is very far from any potential source of water. As for the Gothic South, the best documented story of animals falling from the skies happened in 1892 Alabama. On the evening of May 20th, residents in the tiny town of Coalburg, which is just about 8 miles southeast of Birmingham, reported an odd black cloud that hung over their downtown for several hours. There wasn't any rain or wind, just an unusually dark cloud. So just before midnight, a light shower started. First water, and then, to everyone's horror, thousands, which eventually grew to millions, of slithering creatures that the townfolk originally thought to be snakes. A few of the braver souls went out to investigate, and they discovered that the snakes were in fact eels, and these eels measured from a few inches to a full foot in length. To everyone's confusion, they weren't an eel that was native to that area. Instead, they were more common along the Pacific coast and across Mexico and Central America. And when the morning, the sun began to dry up the invaders, and the resourceful townfolk began raking them into enormous piles and eventually used them as fertilizer. Once the eels were gone, the question remained, where the heck had they come from? Scientists suggested that the eels, just like the Kansas slaughterhouse and the fish and frogs from ancient myths, were likely picked up by a cyclone, in this case a waterspout, and flung into the air and dropped on the unsuspecting town hundreds of miles away. Okay, back to blood falls. Well, it turns out that just like showers of animals, stories of blood falling from the sky are as old as storytelling. In Homer's epic poem, The Iliad, he mentions Zeus sending a rain of blood to cover the Trojan battlefield where his son Sarpedon was to soon die in battle. The Greek biographer Plutarch writes of a blood rain while Romulus, the founder of Rome, governed the new empire. Other authors like Livy and Pliny also wrote of blood rains, and in most cases these showers were seen as signs of bad things to come. Well, this idea of blood rain as a dark omen continued all through the Middle Ages, and its popularity waxed and waned with the times. And this is interesting. One study gave a take on the phenomena. It showed that in the 1200s to the 1400s, there were fewer than 30 cases of blood falls in written histories. Over the 1500s and the 1600s, this surged to nearly 200 recorded accounts. Then only 43 in the 1700s, but nearly 150 in the 1800s. Some of the best-known stories include one recounted in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. A blood rain fell over large parts of Britain in 685 upon the death of the King of Kent. Another is found in the Irish collection known as the Chronicum Scotorum. In the year 878, a rain of gore and blood covered the plains in Cianachta, and this one they just conveniently pinned on the Druids. Other bloodfalls in European histories included storms marking the coming death of Rivallo, an impending Viking invasion, the bravery of King Richard, and the arrival of the Black Death in the late 1340s. Over centuries, several experts have put forth their explanations for this bloodfall phenomena, other than just it was probably the Druids. Most of these either point to rain that contain minuscule flecks of red dust, like you'd find after a volcanic eruption, or the presence of certain microscopic algae species in the rain that may turn red under the right conditions. Well, it turns out these sightings were also very common in the Gothic South. In the 17 and 1800s, more than 15 blood falls were reported in local southern papers alone, with several more recounted in states like Texas and California. And these weren't just unusual phenomena. These were big news at that time. Neighbors would give their accounts, letters were written to the papers, experts came out of the woodwork to offer studies and theories. They turned into little media circuses every time. I'll give you one good example. On September 6, 1842, just outside of Macon, Georgia, Mr. Stephen McRae reported that his son and nephew had been working in the potato patch when they raised an alarm. He investigated and found all around the patch was covered in a layer of blood and gore. And this wasn't mystery meat. There were 2 or 3 inch chunks of liver, large pieces of flesh, what appeared to be hog entrails, and a kidney that he guessed weighed somewhere between 25 and 30 pounds. The blood was scattered over an area perhaps 50 yards across. Most confusing, it was a clear day with no storm clouds or wind, and no one could think of a predator large enough to pick up a whole hog and drop it from the skies. A large number of local experts, and I'm putting those in air quotes, investigated, but they all came up empty-handed. From 1700 to 1900, there were several recorded blood showers. First, one in Mobile, Alabama, a red cloud that rained down blood and tissue near Clinton, North Carolina, a rain of decaying fish in Hanover County, Virginia, several gallons of blood that nearly fell on a woman in Greenville, Texas, 4 or 5 acres of blood-covered snow in Virginia's Orange County, and flesh that fell like hail for several minutes outside of Gastonia, North Carolina. For nearly all of these, no one could come up with a credible explanation on where all this blood and gore had come from. Another bloodfall in Lawrence, South Carolina in 1843 sounded remarkably like the Macon shower the year before. A farmer's youngest son was picking cotton when he looked up to see the sky was dark with what he called heavy snowflakes. The snow turned out to be chunks of meat as large as hens' eggs. Like in the Macon incident, the sky was clear and there were no signs of winds or storm. This time, the bloodfall was attributed by many to be a sign of the end times. A popular religious leader at the time, William Miller, preached that the second coming was coming sooner than most thought. After years of Bible study, he determined that the world would end on or about that year of 1843. When this bloodfall occurred in 1843, he latched on to it as a sign of the apocalypse. Well, when the year came and went, he changed his date to October of 1844, and by 1845, he decided that the date would remain a mystery, but it was probably still really, really soon. As no one else had any other suggestions on where the chunks of meat had come from, everybody, well, except William Miller, just moved on. Before I talk about my favorite bloodfall story, I want to take a quick sidetrack to Atlanta in 1987. While not exactly on theme with the rest of this episode, it's one of my favorite unsolved mysteries from the Gothic South. This time the blood didn't come from above, it came from the house itself. For 22 years, Minnie and William Winston had rented a 6-room, red brick home at the corner of Fountain Drive and Morris Street. Just before midnight on September 8th, 77-year-old Minnie stepped out of the shower and into tiny puddles of blood. She said at first glance it seemed to be seeping up out of the floorboards. Well, she woke up William, and against all better judgment, they searched the house. They found blood on the floors and lower walls of several rooms, including the kitchen and basement. It was under some of the furniture and even in the house's inaccessible crawl spaces. Homicide detectives were called to the house, and according to the lead investigator, he had never seen anything like it. The blood was tested and it came back human and type O, but that wasn't a match to either Minnie or William, who were both type A. So the newly christened Atlanta Blood House became a local legend, and even though no crime had officially been committed, the police went ahead and declared the house a crime scene just to keep out the nosy neighbors. Well, this led to prank calls to radio stations, constant inquiries from out-of-state newspapers, and even a long line of psychics promising to clear up the mystery. Well, despite all these offers, Atlanta's Blood House remained just that, a mystery. To date, police have had no solutions, no explanations, and no arrests have been made, but they do consider it an open file. And as one Atlanta sergeant noted, we know that houses don't bleed like that. Okay, let's go from bloody walls back to blood falls. One last case in 1841 really grabbed my attention, and it proved to be popular with the crackpot theory types for longer than most. On October 6th, a group of field laborers near Lebanon, Tennessee, reported a small red cloud moving swiftly from east to west immediately over their heads. Soon after it passed, a shower of blood fell all over the tobacco fields. The field's owners investigated and discovered drops of blood and chunks of gore over a patch nearly 50 yards across by 800 yards long. The Raleigh Register and North Carolina Gazette reported that the following Sunday more than 500 people showed up to examine the remnants of blood and rotting meat. The reporter called the stench almost intolerable. Another paper wrote that the shower of blood that fell from heaven was to punish the inhabitants of Lebanon for their wickedness. Well, the author of that story also suggested that the people of Lebanon were, and this is in his words, not any more wicked than the inhabitants of Nashville. Others pointed to bloodfall as a judgment from heaven to warn slave-holding states of their sins, or as an omen of the looming civil war, or even fulfillment of certain prophecies of the book of Revelations. At first, reports came from the field hands under intense questioning. Then they admitted that the bloodfall was nothing more than a hoax they had concocted to amuse themselves. While the experts quickly pointed to the fact that the enormous size and spread of the bloodfall, again over 800 yards long, simply couldn't have been done by hand. The only explanation they countered was that the gore and tissue had to have fallen from an enormous height. About this same time, medical experts started weighing in on their findings and theories. One noted that the samples he had collected were clearly animal tissue, but lacking any trace of blood. He concluded that there is no doubt that this substance is animal matter and belongs to our globe. Nashville expert Dr. Gerald Troost threw his hat into the ring. He fell back on the usual explanation of animals caught in a whirlwind, but he claimed that the airborne flesh had come into contact with what he called an electric cloud, which explained the finely shredded and wide dispersion of the blood and gore. One last theory was proffered by the team of Kirby and Spence, who, with a great degree of certainty, blamed the gore on butterflies. They insisted that the flecks they collected were identical to the red stains that were left by butterflies just after emerging from their cocoons. That red cloud the field hands had seen? Just a huge swarm of newly hatched butterflies flying far above the Tennessee fields and dripping cocoon juice on everything in their path. As wild as that might sound, the butterfly theory really got some traction in the press. And that's what we get for listening to everyone who calls themselves an expert. So what are your favorite unexplained phenomena? What to you makes the Gothic South so fascinating? Drop a comment and let me know, what is it that keeps you up at night when the moon is full? Next up on Haunts and Hollows, True Tales of the Gothic South, we'll take a deep dive into the shadowy connections that tie together two wildly different true crime events. At what point does a coincidence become a conspiracy, or perhaps something much, much darker? Want more folk legends and true tales of the Gothic South? I invite you to subscribe to this podcast. You'll get a new episode every other week, and in each we'll uncover the places, the people, the customs, and the stories that lurk in the shadowed history of the South. You can also check out my latest book, Florida Coast, for a guided road trip of more than 80 of the darkest, most shadowed spots in the Sunshine State. If you want to see me in person, visit me online at hauntsandhollows.com for a list of latest releases and a schedule of cons and events that I attend all around the South. Until then, safe travels.